Hi, my name is Peter Lear. I'm Chief Product Owner for Ways of Working at Nationwide Building Society.
And I'm Kimberley Wilson. I'm Value Realisation Partner at Nationwide Building Society too.
And we'd just like to spend some time giving you insight into the journey that we've been on in terms of adapting and adopting objectives and key results.
So just to set the scene, for those of you who aren't familiar with Nationwide Building Society, we're a mutual organisation. So we're owned by our members rather than any shareholders. We've got about 16 million members so far, and each of those members gets a vote in our AGM. So they set the general direction for where we're going as an organisation. And that means that we really hold the members at the heart of our organisation. So we really mean it when we're here to serve our members. And that really comes to the fore when you see some of the awards we get. So we're number one for customer service in our peer group. We're the UK's most trusted financial brand, and we've just won Which Banking Brand of the Year for about the 4th year running, which is quite ironic seeing as we're a building society and not a bank. We've got about 100-year legacy, which is really great to hold, but also it comes with some challenges that Peter will describe to you.
Thanks, Kim. So being a long-running organisation, it means that we've got some really strong embedded behaviours. And having worked at a number of different organisations in financial services in the UK, I know that Nationwide has got a great set of values which distinguishes itself from the opposition. But we've also got an attitude and an approach to change, which means that we value certainty over speed to product and speed to market. And so on average, it takes us around 2 years to actually finish work and get to value. And in the world that we operate in now, that's just not fast enough. It doesn't meet our members' expectations, and it puts us at a competitive disadvantage. We also find that when we come to the point of benefits realisation, when we've delivered change, quite often what we expected to get isn't aligned to what we really receive. And because of our mutual values, which put our customers, our members at our heart, and also treat our colleagues with real respect and dignity, it means that sometimes it's hard for us to understand how to share risk, and it means that we are vulnerable to collegiate decision making. And that's kind of the nub of what we want to talk to you about, is how within an established organisation with an established set of values and behaviours, it can be sometimes hard to change. And we want to share with you the things that we've tried, what's worked, what hasn't, in terms of being able to introduce objectives and key results so that we can start to accelerate our focus on what is value and how do we get there in incremental steps with the greatest speed. So we spent some time thinking about OKRs, and I think this quote from Elon Musk is a great one, which embodies something that we are trying to move towards, which is accepting that sometimes you're always going to be wrong to some degree, and your aspiration has got to be less wrong as you move forward and you learn. So our journey to adopt OKRs started with some thinking about it, and just over 2 years ago, we took counsel for outside organisations around moving to more agile ways of working. And that included the adoption of OKRs. But what we found was that, as many organisations do, our first step was to start using agile language without actually changing to agile behaviours. So we adopted OKRs. We actually applied OKR language to waterfall style deliveries. And then we were frustrated because there was a mismatch between our aspiration in terms of delivering value in incremental steps and actually what we were observing, and the fact that people were using agile labels and applying them to waterfall methodology. So it just confused the position. That then led us to think about, okay, have we understood what we're trying to achieve with objectives and key results? And have we actually thought about what goes on in other organisations, how they've adopted them, and what some of the key learning can be? We can't turn an organisation that's a building society operating within a regulatory framework in the UK into Google overnight. So Google are great at doing OKRs, and in their context and in their situation, they work really well. What were the key attributes? How did they get benefit from them? What does that mean for the organisation? So we went off and did some research, some reflection. We sought opinion from inside the organisation and outside. That then led us to being really clear around what the problem was. And what we actually found was that fundamentally our understanding of what is value was misaligned. Different people had different opinions. We didn't have a defined set of descriptions for what value looks like, how to identify it, how to test for it. And so we then decided to go on a journey to say, okay, let's scope out some material we can use and share in the organisation, and let's then go out and test different ways of working. So we started to trial different ways of being able to do value, of being able to write and then measure OKRs. And that was brilliant because we spent about 6 to 8 months going out, trying things, and then rapidly iterating the design that we had, taking feedback from the people that we had gone out and spoken to, and then adapting, and then retrying it. And trying it with the same audience sometimes, and trying it with different audiences. That then allowed us to get into a loop of feedback and learning. And by using the feedback and the learning that we got, we've been able to continue to iterate our understanding and our ability to adopt OKRs in the organisation. And that starts to not only help us because we can start to focus in on the valuable things that we want to deliver as an organisation, but also that pattern of using experimentation, getting feedback and learning is also one that we want to adopt for all of the change that we do in the organisation. So it's very powerful.
So I just walk you through some of our progress so far on how we've tried to tackle OKRs and the move towards value. And it'll be interesting to hear in the chat if any of you have had similar experiences that align with ours and how you've overcome it. So the first step, we went on a journey to OKRs about a year or so ago. Thought it can't be that hard at the start. We'll just tell all the organisation in strategic investment to write all their reporting via objective and key results. As you can imagine, we had a lovely set of objectives and key results at the end, but when you really look into them, actually they were just milestones under the guise of the OKR language. The thinking hadn't changed. There wasn't very much reference to value in there. They were essentially just waterfall milestones. And I think when you ask some of the teams back then, they were doing OKRs mainly for reporting purposes rather than understanding the true benefit to the teams themselves, which made a fundamental difference. So that didn't quite work. Next approach was attempting to do a top-down approach from senior management. So we talked to the senior management explaining about OKRs, and they recognised that OKRs were powerful, but they were very busy, and also we didn't have any evidence to show them that OKRs could make a fundamental difference and that it wasn't just a language change. So the top-down approach didn't work for us. But this is when the pivot arrived. So we started to talk more and more about OKRs with teams themselves and about the people who were interested in early adoption. We asked some teams if they'd work with us in trialing the new ways of working, and we really increased the support we gave them so that with a limited team we could give much more coaching style behaviour and be with them on the journey and get that feedback and shift our own learning as we go. And with that support, we could really demonstrate the success that OKRs and the shift to value could have. Because we had increased support and coaching, we were able to change more of the mindset than we would have done trying to go across the whole organisation straight away. The other benefit of having a successful early adopters use the approach is that news of success filtered naturally up to senior management and across the organisation as well. So more teams gradually wanted to join in and wanted to try the new approach. And the teams themselves highlighted the impediments, which was a much stronger message than us centrally trying to tell people what blockers there were in the organisation. And our approach ourselves was different as well. So we adopted an approach of listening, learning, and trying to work together to get feedback and improving. So that that previous quote by Elon Musk about we assume that we haven't got it perfect yet. So the more we can learn from the new teams about what we need to change and how we can continuously improve, the better.
So, what is it we're facing into right now? And there's kind of three main areas in terms of overcoming objections, in terms of how we actually launch OKRs into the organisation. And here's some of our key insight. So the first one is that OKRs require different accountability in your organisation. You need to be clear around how you transition from an organisation that sets out projects which are potentially long-lived in terms of duration, but delay value. You need to get to a situation where you have an organisational structure which supports people being accountable for value delivery. For us, that means that we're pivoting into a model which is aligned to three customer missions, member missions, which are about providing the right level of value to meet our member needs and aligning resources behind them. So not having siloed resources across the organisation, but actually having a real focus on how we lead and define what value will look like for our members. The next one is changing the focus away from doing work to actually achieving value realisation. That's proven to be quite a challenging mindset shift within our teams who are typically focused on delivering against things like Gantt charts, project definitions, requirements documents. So the way that we had organised ourselves to do work was around saying, big upfront design, define a plan of action, execute that plan of action for a given amount of money in a given time frame, and achieving those objectives would be regarded as successful. What we're now saying is we want the organisation to think about how early can you get to value and how quickly can you pivot away from something which isn't going to give you value. So it's quite challenging for people who've worked in a waterfall, deterministic style of work. And then collaboration. Leaders feel under pressure a lot of the time. And one of the things that projects tend to lead to is expectations from a sponsor or from a commissioning person to say, I know what I want up front, I'll define it in detail, and then I'll organise people to do the work. What we're finding with OKRs is that actually you benefit from having a really collaborative group discussion to understand what is it you're trying to achieve against one of our drivers of value. And then you get the team to think about, okay, what would that then turn into in terms of quarterly OKRs? How would you break that work down? And that's not about leaders having to go off, write the 10 commandments and bring them back to the team, but it is about leaders demonstrating vulnerability in saying, I don't have all of the answers, but I want to work with you as a team to define them. So across all of those three, it is about that need to think about how do people focus on their work, what's their current psychological safety index in terms of how they feel about changing, and then for us, focus on these three areas. But we certainly have this renewed desire from our customers, from our members, to actually go off and deliver value sooner to them.
And equally, we have a renewed desire for change as well from our own teams that across Nationwide. So we've gathered this feedback from some of the support and the training we've been doing about training out what's the difference in value and what do we mean by objectives. And I'm sure this won't be unfamiliar to a lot of you watching this. About we asked teams, how do you feel when setting outcomes and objectives at the moment? So they said they were boring, a bit generic, written then forgotten, not valued, kind of tick box exercise, which absolutely is very negative generally. But the positive thing, so when you ask them how they want to feel about outcomes and objectives, they get the vision and they're inspired. They want them to be measurable. They want them to be personal, and they really want to do them. So they get the vision, they get why objectives and why outcomes are important, which is the first step in making the change. So we're on the right track.
Yeah, so some building blocks that we've focused in on. The first is value measurement. And we mentioned earlier about being really clear on what value is. We tested lots of different scenarios, and we came to a situation where we realised that the things we need to measure in terms of value are around the revenue that the organisation can generate, around control of our costs, around how we respond to risk as an organisation, and our ultimate goal, member satisfaction. So we try and make sure that our work comes back to one of those four drivers. And we've been testing and learning around how you can actually focus on those drivers to make sure that you get the right work defined. And it's proving to be a really powerful tool in terms of making sure that we focus on the right things. It also helps us in that journey towards saying, rather than planning for value that you'll see in 2 years' time, let's plan on how we can quickly and at the earliest opportunity realise value for our members, because our organisation is owned by our members. Correcting your course. So if you're used to an organisation that says, okay, if you want to do a project, you have to submit a business case, it has to be detailed, it has to go through many approval steps, it can actually create psychological constraint, which is people are being challenged and checked to make sure that they've got their business case definition right, and then they'll be held accountable to it. That then sometimes stops you from correcting course if you find out that something's not true. The psychological safety may not be there for people to go back and say, hey, I had a hypothesis, but actually it turns out not to be true, so I want to change direction. And that's part of the problem with business cases and locking people into them. When you link to value and you understand, if I can quickly get to value, then that must mean I'm heading in the right direction. The opposite is also true, which is if I find that I'm not getting to value quickly, I need to correct something. And creating that contract within your organisation is really important. We're only at the beginning of that journey, getting people to be comfortable with pivoting, but we're starting to see some signs that actually people understand it's important and they're happy to go for it. And good enough. I mentioned at the very start that we tended to be an organisation that values perfection and spending lots of time investing in design up front. The world is changing at such a fast pace now that you have to realise good enough is good enough. So actually, being able to measure what you're delivering, being able to be clear on what you want in terms of value, and being adaptive enough that you can change direction, you need that building block as well of good enough. Knowing when to continue, when to pause, when to stop is really important.
One of the other things we've been doing a bit differently this time around is just increasing our support and tailoring our support on coaching to really help the teams that need it. So an example, you'll see a few examples of these on the later pages, but just being there in a coaching facility to help teams themselves map out what work they're doing and how that links back to the value, and helping teams themselves to call out any risks to value along the way. We found that often that has a more beneficial outcome than us going in and picking out the risk to value centrally, because then they feel more comfortable to make decisions based on those risks, and they can course correct themselves and they can highlight any risks in the future. So increasing that support and being a coaching and facilitator is one of the key things that we've been doing. And also accepting step changes. So not marathons. So when we first tried to do OKRs, we thought we could leap right to the end, I feel. But now we're accepting that this is quite a long journey, changing people's mindset to think about value and think about rather than what you're doing is quite a difficult challenge. So just try and tackle step changes at a time rather than tackling the whole right to the end of the leap. It's behaviour change, and behaviour change is really difficult to do, and it needs enough support to get there. So if you try and go right to the end and try and finish your goal in one step, you're not going to have enough support to cover the whole breadth that you need. And finally, this one about making sure that OKRs should be owned by the whole business. They should be the universal language of the business, not just used within change teams. They should generate a dialogue throughout the change, not just at the start when you're doing your business case to be signed off by a governance forum. You should be continuously checking your OKRs, talking about them, and checking that the business sides buy into them, change teams buy into them, and anyone else along that value chain. And if you don't have that dialogue, that's one of the most common areas of where things start to fall down.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Kim. And as we know from painful experience, sometimes people set off on a course of action, not having transparency of what you're trying to achieve as an organisation, or if they believe actually they're in an enabler project for something else. But again, stuck in the I've defined what I want in terms of task, as opposed to I've defined what I need in terms of how it will unlock value, you can end up very disappointed in terms of what gets delivered by those teams. Not because they've done anything wrong per se, but just because that transparency of what we were trying to achieve isn't there for them. So I hope we've shared some stuff with you which is both useful. We've tried to be open and honest around what our experiences have been. Kim's got some great examples of where we want to go next in terms of how we're developing the material that supports us. This is work in progress, but in the spirit of experimentation and learning. Kim?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been working on is this map from the work you're doing and the capabilities you're delivering right up to what value you're achieving. So mapping them up from the work to this exploitation layer, really important. Are you relying on somebody else to turn on a switch or do another piece of work to realize your value, or is your path to value quite straightforward? And then equally important, what your are. So what are those fast changing metrics you can recognize that will give you an early indicator that either your value achievement is going well, or that there might be a risk to your value achievement? Because if we know there's a risk, that's a really good sign, because then you can course correct and you can do something about it. If you find out in 2 years, it's going to be too late and you're a bit stuck. So leading metrics are one of the really key things here. And then at the top, the lagging metrics, knowing what your key driver is. So what are you going after above anything else with this capability? And if you had to make a decision call, what would you prioritize above anything else? And around the side are some of the key questions that we found, the common kind of pitfalls or the common checks that we just think are really important that everyone needs to know. So making sure you know who's going to exploit it, making sure you know who your customers are and whether they're actually pulling or demanding. Kind of some of the gotchas that if teams themselves can recognize these and highlight these, then we can course correct and do something about it before they catch anyone out. Again, so these are some early examples of what we mean by value. So what we think lies in the lagging metric space and what we think might be examples of leading indicators. The caveat on this, we know we're not perfect yet. We know there may be changes to this, but put something down on the page, experiment with teams to see if they like it, and then we'll keep adapting and iterating it and seeing and making it better. But just putting some examples out there so teams have an idea of what we might mean by value. And then putting some really simple guidance about what do we mean by things like key results, leading indicators, lagging indicators. We found taking it back to plain English really a good way of educating, and it's gone down really well with people. And then trying to get this message across that course correction is a really good thing. So even if your leading indicators or your key results aren't improving, that's a really good opportunity because you spotted it much earlier than you would have your lagging indicator or your waterfall benefit. If you spot that something's not working, it's a great opportunity to course correct, and just explaining that to people.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kim. So that's all we've got in terms of presentation. Kim and I will be engaging with the chat during the time when these sessions are broadcast. So we look forward to some really interesting questions, observation and insight. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.